All right. Well, we are talking today with Bob Mellman, who's a excellent advisor and mentor to a lot of students in the department, a really important influence for a lot of folks here. Um, Bob had a long career. He got his PhD from MIT a little while ago,
A few
number of
years
years,
ago.
and had a long career at JP Morgan Chase. He was senior economist and managing director um, at that big institution. So he's brought his expertise to City College, and like I said, just does amazing job working with students. And so we're going to talk today with him about the macroeconomic outlook. Um, so Bob, do you want to give kind of a short synopsis of kind of where we got here and, kind of what sort of things the Fed is thinking?
Yeah. So the background for the economy is really after COVID hit, inflation took off, among other things. It was much higher than the Fed wanted for 2 or 3 years. And the reasons are, I guess, two. One, on the supply side, a lot of people couldn't get to work. There were shutdowns. Various factories all over the world had shutdowns. So you had less supply coming onto the market. At the same time, the federal government wanted to support incomes and wanted people not to suffer too much when they went through periods of unemployment when they couldn't get to work. And there were really quite enormous imports of income supports for the population here in the United States. And in fact, what we call disposable income didn't decline at all. So what you had was plenty of purchasing power or demand, and not as much supply. And when you have that condition, inflation takes off. And the Fed was in a time when a lot of people were suffering through COVID and not being able to go to work and losing income, not inclined to raise interest rates and try to, I guess, hurt the economy and hurt individuals. So it took a while, but after the vaccines came and things got more or less back to normal, the Fed realized it was behind the curve, that people really didn't like inflation and it was too high. And they raised their short-term interest rates from close to zero to 5.25% to 5.5% range, really quite quickly. It takes a while for monetary policy to work, but what we've seen lately is that growth has started to slow. I must say the last quarter's growth was close to 5%, but I think there's bouncing up and
Third
down.
quarter GDP print was just off the charts.
Yeah, 5.2. But if you look at the trends, it does look like growth is slowing. And I must say the latest economic data for the last few months, whether you look at employment, the average work week, which I look at as a leading indicator of employment, whether you look at retail sales or industrial production, and you look at the housing market, it does look like the trend in growth is really slowing. What the Fed's focused on is the trend in inflation slowing. Yet unemployment rates are still pretty low. And it looks like the trend in inflation is also slowing. Over the last several months, we've seen good indications that inflation is coming down to what had been 5 or 6% to probably something like 3.5% fourth quarter to fourth quarter last year, and at the low end of a 3.5% range as you get toward the end of this year. And so I think most economists feel like both inflation and growth are slowing. It's a question of just how much and what you forecast for next year. And the markets, of course, are focused on when's the Fed going to start easing and try to support the economy instead of slow down the economy. I'd say my view is that we don't know for sure. Forecasting inflation with any precision is very difficult, but inflation seems to be slowing. When it slows, usually a good slowdown is about 1% a year. So if it averaged 3.5% last year, it will probably average 2.5%, however measured, next year. And toward the end of the year, getting to the Fed's goal, which is 2% inflation. if it's still above the Fed's goal, and the Fed is coming off a period where their credibility has really been hurt, and they want to be sure that they get inflation down, probably they'll be a little slow in easing. And I looked at the JP Morgan forecast. There's no cut in interest rates from what now are really quite high levels till the middle of next year. But this is a big debate about it among economists. How quickly does inflation come down, and when does the Fed start to ease? So I'll be, maybe it's time to stop now and can have other discussion or questions.
Well, so to put this, what you're saying, into kind of the sort of thing we've been doing in class. So it's COVID restrictions meant the aggregate supply curve moved inward, which led to some inflation. Aggregate demand was shifted outward by the stimulus programs, so that sort of intersected there at much higher rates of inflation. And then, yeah, the Fed raising interest rates is basically easing back aggregate demand, while, yeah, at the same time, aggregate supply, the sort of bottlenecks issues are starting to diminish. Yeah, I'd seen some report that this is the first quarter the auto manufacturers did not cite chip shortages as, a constraint on them, unable to sell more cars. So yeah, it's really, like, previously both aggregate supply and aggregate demand bumped, and now they're going in opposite directions. And yeah, and I think it was a surprise to a lot of folks that the slope of the Phillips curve was not where we had thought it was going to be, that there was not much of an appreciable trade-off.
Right.
Yeah, inflation came down, unemployment hasn't really changed much at all.
Yes, it seemed to me that unemployment rates got so low that firms had to hoard workers, and they just didn't want to lose them, because it's really pretty hard to hire good workers. The people who are out there are often the ones who aren't the best, and if you had good workers, you want to keep them. Going into this year, when interest rates were going up so high, I think there's a fair number of economists who called for a recession. Monetary policy was getting so tight, and mortgage rates were going to 8% from what had been 2.5% to 3%, very, very low. I think the reason the economy wasn't weaker is usually when you go into recession, unemployment rates go up, and people really worry about, are they going to have a job or not? And then they stop spending. At least until now, the labor markets have still been quite tight. Unemployment rates are still pretty low. And most people out there aren't too worried about, are they going to lose a job and not be able to get another one? The unemployment rate has been creeping up. Some indicators seem to show that labor markets aren't quite so tight. So I think as we go into next year, we'll see more of that. There'll be more, I suppose, fear among people, and maybe they will slow the spending more, which would be my forecast.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, yeah, the housing market is definitely cooling back. Between the price increases,
Yeah,
a lot of properties, plus, yeah, the mortgage rate hikes, just, yeah, the amount people pay for a property is just really has shot up. And yeah,
yeah.
certainly sectors. Yeah.
What I was going to say, there's a lot of related spending. When people buy new houses, they buy new furniture typically, and want to redo it. And there's a lot of brokerage commissions. The home sales are really very weak now. So all those items are at a much lower level and probably going to stay there. So that's, one of the reasons why the economy is slowing.
Yeah. Yeah, and we will see if bottlenecks in sort of housing construction catch up, or to what extent that's going to happen. But that's some policy issues, right?
Yeah, I mean, I must say, as I look at the numbers, rents are very, very high, which anyone living in New York knows, but really nationally, they've gone up a lot. So there's a lot of apartment buildings still going on. Not so much single family housing, but especially in apartments. That's going on, and that's one sector. Usually when interest rates go up, it collapses or go down a lot, but not this time because rents are so high.
Yeah. Also, yeah, hopefully that'll be good news for renters. Not as early as anybody would like, but yeah.
Yeah, I have seen
I
numbers
mean,
that
one of
apartments coming on the market and rents are starting to weaken some, at least nationally. I don't know about New York.
the ways rent is the supply is increasing in rental market is people are not selling. So some of the people who are planning to would have otherwise sold their houses or apartments, they're putting on rent, hoping that in the future interest rate will go down and price will go up. So it's really sort of the like housing buying like purchase market which is being affected. I have a separate question. So we teach our students there are two main sort of weapons in macroeconomics arsenal. One is fiscal and other is monetary. So we spoke about monetary policy. And honestly, I haven't really seen much discussion on fiscal policy, um, even in like popular discussion. We know theoretically that, you know, if we want to move back spending, one way to like cut government spending or increase taxes. And honestly, I think that would have been a better policy than monetary policy, because one problem with monetary policy is that, you know, some of the things that affect inflation are beyond the government's control, like notably oil price. And with everything going on in the world, it's not easy. You know, at some point, Biden administration released like oil from its stockpile, so they do this kind of extreme. They take extreme measures to stabilize oil prices, but still there's limit to what they can do. But then a Fed increasing interest rate affects so many people, like people who are, well, of course, the home buyers. You know, it has always been American dream to buy a house, and it almost kind of depresses people. They can't do it now, and particularly because like some of their friends and relatives did that 2 years ago at like 3.5% interest rate. So I think that this such a steep rise in interest rate affects common people um, in a variety of ways: home loan, car loan, eventually student loan. But I guess my explanation, of course, is the tightening of fiscal policy is so politically unpalatable that it's kind of the third rail and the government doesn't even want to go there. But I'm wondering, from a policy perspective, assuming that it is not so politically sensitive to cut back government spending or raise taxes and have a contractionary fiscal policy, do you think that would have affected the inflation problem, the overheating problem of the economy in a more direct way?
Yes, I mean, I think
In other words, would fiscal policy have been more effective than tightening monetary policy?
yes, I mean, I must say, going into an election year, it's very hard to raise taxes and it's very hard to follow fiscal policy, actually. I still get the JP Morgan economic publications. So I can see that they're estimating that fiscal policy will tighten next year by about a percentage point of GDP as some of the effects of stimulus from COVID support and so forth run off, and you don't know what, and so there will be some, I'd say, moderate tightening of fiscal policy, however measured, but it's not the main driver here. I think the Fed's really the main driver of slowing growth and getting inflation down.
Well, and the fiscal policy that was passed most recently was called the Inflation Reduction Act,
Right.
which there's certainly an amount of branding, but I mean, there is some also increases to aggregate supply was kind of the thinking there.
And when I saw some numbers about when interest rates go way up, usually investment spending by companies goes down quite a bit. And in many categories it has, but things like building new plants for electronics and high tech are up a lot.
Yeah.
So you can see that there are effects on certain industries from the so-called Inflation Reduction Act.
My understanding is some companies were actually, particularly tech companies, were sitting on a big pile of money, and their revenue and profit also increased during like sharply during COVID time. So probably they were dry. I don't honestly, I don't know like about small and medium enterprises, and I'm assuming that such a steep increase in interest rate are affecting their like financing and liquidity. But I'm really, this not as necessarily as an economist, but just as a citizen, this real sharp increase in interest rate, it's quite something. And
yes,
I think that I don't know whether Fed is going to like actually start reducing it, but I'm hoping that they will just keep it steady at least for a few.
Yeah, I mean, I think as inflation, 6 months ago, it wasn't so clear inflation was coming down. And I think, I don't remember the timing exactly, but the stock market was having a very tough time. And interest rates, market interest rates were still very high, and people were thinking the Fed might tighten some more. As we've gotten evidence that inflation actually is coming down, the 10-year Treasury bond has come from a little over 5% to below 4.5% now, I think, and other market interest rates have come down anticipating Fed easing, and not clear exactly when it'll be, but almost everyone thinks sometime next year they will start easing, based on the idea that inflation really is coming down toward their target. But in terms,
I mean, I'm not a macroeconomist, but I just wonder. This is just a speculation, based on like the trend in the economy, that whether we should revise our notion of things like natural rate of unemployment, which we typically thought like 4.5%, but with advent of like technology and hiring, and particularly for gig economy, where a lot of people are working because they wouldn't have worked before if this kind of gigs were not available. Maybe the natural rate of unemployment should be lower, and there will be like the 2% rate of inflation. Probably, I don't know. I honestly don't think that we are going to sustain 2% rate of inflation in the near future. So maybe now we will shift to a sort of new notion of normalcy. I don't know what you think about that.
Yeah, it's very hard to know how hard it is to get inflation down, but we had, I forget, 5 or 6 years where the Fed couldn't get inflation up to 2%. Inflation was always averaging 1 or 1.5%. So, it may well be that as I say, inflation is probably coming down from 3.5 to 2.5, and it could well come down to 2 and stay there, but I just don't know.
No, I think overall it's starting to look like Jay Powell is going to take a victory lap.
Yeah. Finally, yeah. Yeah, on that unemployment rate, that's a very good point you made, Prabal. That it used to be people had to find jobs that they would commute to. And if it was too hard a commute, they wouldn't take the job and they would stay unemployed. To the extent they can work from home, it's probably easier for people who are unemployed to find jobs if they can work from home.
All right. Well,
I mean, not only work from home, but also like we are seeing. I mean, even in India, we are seeing. I mean, all these delivery companies have expanded in India too. So some youth who wouldn't have, worked in even in informal sector, now they are like, delivering groceries and making small amount of money. And it's a different thing how they are sort of, this is not a career, and how they're sort of, in terms of human capital accumulation, what it means. But technically they are employed. So if someone asks them in a survey that did you work for
Yeah.
pay over last 2 weeks, they would say yes. So
Mhm.
so this is why we're thinking that that will show up as employment in official statistics. Um, I don't know what the long-term implication for the labor market would be, but the gig economy is definitely contributing to lowering of official unemployment rate.
Right, good point.
Yeah.
I hadn't thought much about it, but I think that's true.
And of course, yes, all these outlooks are conditional on items come up in the news. We
Right.
never really, what will 2024 bring is, all we can be sure is it will bring some series of surprises that, will
Yeah.
perhaps force the Fed to veer off in one direction or another. But yeah, at least for now, looking like they have a reasonably clear path. Well, thank you for your time, Bob.
Okay, it was my
And,
pleasure being here,
very good to talk to you.
Right.
Enlightening as always.
and I'll say hi to all the students. Okay, so
Right.
long.
So